So what I want to do here is have a discussion about Hawkeye, aka Clint Barton. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of this video, you'll have a strong understanding of his character, as well as why he's proved to be such a mainstay in the Avengers and Marvel comics. So Hawkeye first appeared in Tales of Suspense issue number 57 in 1964 and was created by Stan Lee with contributions from Don Heck and was, for all intents and purposes, designed to be a Marvel counterpart to DC's Green Arrow. Jumping back to the 1940s following the introduction of Superman and the subsequent success of Batman, Aquaman, The Flash, and Green Lantern, under writer Mort Weisinger, DC introduced Green Arrow, whose physical appearance was based on the fictional hero Robin Hood, but who also modeled Green Arrow after Robin Hood's legend of fighting for the common man. While Green Arrow would wax and wane as his publications went into the 1950s and 1960s, the title was revamped and received universal acclaim from both critics and readers due to the efforts of writer Dennis O'Neil and artist Neil Adams, who updated Oliver Queen's appearance for the modern reader and paired him with Hal Jordan due to both characters' publications failing to sell, but also brought realistic stories to the Green Arrow landscape by focusing on drug addiction, racism, sexism, overpopulation, and pollution. At the same time, Marvel had been on the ramp up following the introductions of Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Thor, the Avengers, and the X-Men, but in the midst of their vast roster and while they had quickly been gaining ground on DC as the top comic book company at the time, Marvel's battle for superhero supremacy was held short by the fact that their various heroes were all, in some form or fashion, composed of beings with superpowers. Covered in a 1998 interview on his early hero influences and how Marvel Comics got started, Stan Lee had stated that at the time, his emphasis was on creating stories he considered to be fun, instead of focusing on the nature of people and the philosophy of right and wrong. As a result, very little attention was paid to DC heroes who seemed to be lacking in sales, with more emphasis placed on creating heroes whose stories could compete with the vast and long-standing roster of DC's heroes. On the other hand, with the civil rights movement at a fever pitch and supported by the efforts of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the Black Panther Party, Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams were setting the world on fire with their Green Arrow stories due to the realistic depictions of social issues and the various struggles of social classes within the United States. To this end, the Green Arrow line of comics exploded into popularity, creating a craze within both DC and Marvel for street-level heroes who dealt with real-world issues as opposed to planetary events. While Marvel would go on to use the stories of Daredevil to initiate the launch of Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and the Punisher, Marvel also looked to Green Arrow as a template for a hero of their own. However, the issue Marvel faced was that launching a new character with a solo title was a massive gamble unless the hero had something to offer the comic book landscape which was unavailable anywhere else. While Luke Cage stands as one of the best examples of this thought process due to his character being introduced at the height of Hollywood's blaxploitation era and the concept of content targeted towards African Americans, Hawkeye was simply just a man with exceptional accuracy. Looking to ensure that Clint received the best foot forward regarding his introduction into Marvel Comics, Stan Lee had used the Tales of Suspense line as it had still been serving as a series, which featured Iron Man leading up to the launch of his own solo title. In his first appearance with the story Hawkeye the Marksman, while Tony Stark is on a date with Pepper Potts at Coney Island, Clint Barton is initially presented to us as one of several carnival attractions under the guise that he's the world's greatest marksman. Conversely, instead of the crowd taking notice of Clint's exceptional marksmanship, their attention is drawn away due to one of the rides malfunctioning and putting the lives of his passengers in danger. Where the day was saved by Tony Stark, who's able to don the Mark I costume and correct the malfunctioning ride, Clint had taken to becoming jealous over what he considered to be a silly idea, and that Iron Man and others like him were largely just normal people with a few technological gadgets, but had somehow managed to outshine Clint entirely. And so, taking the rest of the night to fashion a costume for himself alongside specially designed arrows, Clint gave himself the name Hawkeye and began his journey to operate as a superhero. However, during his first outing in an effort to stop a criminal who had robbed a jewelry store, where Hawkeye was able to dispatch the criminal rather easily, when the police arrived, they had caught Clint in the middle of examining the jewels, leading them to believe that he and the robber were working in cahoots. Using the officer's momentary distraction while they secured the jewels in order to make their escape, during the process, Hawkeye came face to face with Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. Now, for those of you who are curious, Black Widow is a character that I will have a video on, but in these early appearances following her debut in Tales of Suspense number 52, Natasha was more of a non-costume Russian spy designed by Stan Lee and Don Heck as a counterpart to the anti-communist stories of Iron Man found within the Tales of Suspense line. Now, during the conversation between the two, because Iron Man was Marvel's most popular title among women, the two had been toying with the idea of creating a kind of forbidden romance between Stark and Romanoff due to Tony's capitalist views and Natasha's communist views. To this end, Hawkeye was recruited by Natasha for the purpose of killing Iron Man without bringing harm to Tony Stark. Now to sidetrack here for those that might be a little confused, in my video explaining the history of the Iron Man character, when he was originally created, in an effort to allow Stark to act as a hero without putting the livelihood of his friends or company in danger, a cover was created with the idea that Iron Man was the bodyguard of Tony Stark, meaning that to the world, the two individuals were separate entities. In addition to this, because Black Widow was considered to be so beautiful for his efforts, Hawkeye was informed that should he be successful in completing his mission, that he would win the heart of Black Widow. Traveling back to Stark Tower and causing a ruckus within the facility in an effort to draw Iron Man out, Hawkeye's actions proved to be successful, with Tony Stark appearing and the two engaging in battle. Now, something to point out here is that because Hawkeye is skilled with arrows but doesn't possess a mind for scientific genius, with Black Widow as a benefactor who in turn was extremely well funded, Clint was provided with the tools necessary to help with Iron Man's defeat and the completion of his mission. Coming in the form of arrows filled with a salt, bleach, water, and vinegar mixture, because these chemicals cause metal to rust extremely fast, when Iron Man is attacked by Hawkeye, his suit almost immediately begins to harden and rust, giving him only moments to change into a new uniform. Coming to the realization that the Iron Man suit is unique unto itself and that no one in the world possesses technology on such a scale, save the Fantastic Four and Black Panther, while Stark continues to don a new costume, Hawkeye steals the pieces of the rusted suit, after which he makes his move to retreat back to the laboratory of Black Widow. However, in the midst of his travels, he's discovered and attacked by Iron Man, with the two battling one another into the countryside and away from populated areas. Now, where the fight between the two is relatively short-lived, with Iron Man overpowering Hawkeye and believing to have knocked him out in the process, as he made his way to retrieve the stolen pieces of armor, Black Widow had arrived to witness the end of the confrontation and offering a momentary distraction, which allowed Clint to attack Iron Man with an exploding arrow. At the same time, because Iron Man's armor is impenetrable to all but the most advanced technologies, the arrow ricocheted off, hitting Black Widow in the process. And so where she did survive the experience, Stan Lee and Don Heck left the ending open, allowing for the return of both Hawkeye and Black Widow in future stories. So following this first appearance and going into the future of Marvel Comics, Hawkeye's appearances within the pages of Tales of Suspense lasted 7 more issues, where he was largely a temporary love interest to Black Widow. During the events of issue number 60, which came out of issue number 59 and saw Tony Stark's arc reactor damaged after a battle with Black Knight, because the stories took place consecutively, with issue 59 seeing Tony Stark interrupted by Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan following his return, in an effort to maintain the illusion that he and Iron Man were two separate individuals, the story played out, with Iron Man claiming that Tony Stark had been sent on a mission with no one knowing his purpose. Sending up a litany of red flags which also drew the attention of the media, Black Widow had seized the opportunity to steal Stark's technologies and plans for her employers, using Hawkeye to do so. While the events would see the plan fail entirely due to the fact that Stark kept all of the information regarding his Iron Man technologies in his head, with Stan Lee and Don Heck remaining on as writer and artist, over the course of the next 5 issues, the pairing of Black Widow and Hawkeye was gradually adjusted to become a romance in addition to a partnership. To this end, issue number 64 focused on the duo's failed attempts to extract Stark's knowledge on his armor and weapons in exchange for the lives of Pepper and Happy Hogan. While this story and those appearing in the final issues of Tales of Suspense maintain this consistent plot of Hawkeye and Black Widow teaming up but ultimately failing, where it wasn't on the same level as other top-tier heroes, the popularity of Hawkeye began to see a slow rise among Marvel's reader base. The reason for this was due to the fact that with Iron Man existing as one of Marvel's most popular heroes, owing to his provocative pro-capitalist stance amidst public hatred for the Vietnam War, Hawkeye had received greater exposure as a man who was inspired by heroes that fell onto the path of a villain. In addition to this, the fact that issue number 60 had depicted Hawkeye using arrows capable of damaging Iron Man's armor struck a chord with readers who viewed this as an example of the idea that Stark could be toppled by a normal man if the means and the motivation were there. Now, because the Tales of Suspense line was in the process of being cancelled out and rolled into Captain America's solo series, allowing Marvel to move Iron Man into his own line of comics, the question had lingered as to the fate of Hawkeye. While Marvel has never really had an issue with removing the publications of characters or teams who fail to maintain sales, the problem faced in this circumstance was that Hawkeye's popularity had been increasing to the point that fans loved the idea of a Marvel counterpart to DC's Green Arrow. Looking to keep the idea trending so long as Hawkeye remained popular, under Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Clint Barton was transitioned to the roster of Avengers with issue number 16 in May of 1965. Where Avengers itself was still being released as a monthly series, issue number 16 served a significant role in the title's history as it saw Thor vacating the team for the first time, with Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and Hawkeye all joining the roster. Coming out of issue number 15, which saw the original Baron Zemo assembling Black Knight, Melter, Executioner, and Enchantress under the title of the Masters of Evil and leading an attack against the Avengers, at the conclusion of the battle in the opening pages of issue number 16, Heinrich Zemo was killed and Thor vacated his position on the team in order to battle Loki during the Trial of the Gods storyline and Journey into Mystery issue number 116. Looking to fill Thor's role by offering a position to Namor the Submariner, during the team's first meeting absent Thor, Hawkeye had broken into the facility and tied up Jarvis. With Iron Man responding to the incident and Hawkeye explaining his history and that he intended to become a hero and model himself after the Avengers but was swept up in the events of Tales of Suspense, Tony Stark offered the benefit of the doubt but did not have the power to grant Avengers status on his own. Calling together Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne with Captain America tending to his own battles, Hawkeye proved his usefulness by firing 3 arrows simultaneously, which cut through the bonds around Jarvis's ankles, wrists, and mouth. Accepting Clint as part of the Avengers, but also inducting Wanda Maximoff and Pietro Maximoff following their disillusionment with Magneto and his desire to wage war against humanity. The remainder of the issue largely focused on Captain America mopping up the forces of Baron Zemo, while the rest of the team made the official public announcement of the new roster. Now, following issue number 16 and going into the rest of the series, because Clint was the only character on the team who was not one of the original members and had no powers, the task set before Marvel was to ensure that his character was written in a way that could draw special attention without seeming out of place. The caveat to this was that during this time, Jack Kirby was in the process of leaving Marvel to find employment as a writer for DC. To sidetrack here, while Jack Kirby was consistently credited as the artist behind the design of Marvel's original characters, in truth, he was as much a story architect as anything else. On the other hand, in the eyes of Marvel fans, and even now going into the current day, the face of Marvel's origin and rise to prominence was largely viewed to be Stan Lee. As a result, and in addition to broken promises from Marvel publisher Martin Goodman, as well as shrinking creative input regarding the characters he had helped to design, the departure of Jack Kirby literally left Marvel scrambling for artists who could pick up the slack and maintain the artistry Kirby had used. Bringing the title under the inking of Don Heck, who had co-created Iron Man and had been a part of the comic industry since the early 1950s, Hawkeye's roots as a misunderstood hero were maintained, leading to stories where he had expressed a romantic interest in Scarlet Witch, but had run into obstacles in the form of her brother Quicksilver. In addition to this, and for reasons unexplored due to a non-existent origin story, Hawkeye had developed a dislike for authority figures and in turn, constantly found himself at odds with Captain America, where Clint would oftentimes question Roger's orders and even his ability to serve as an adequate leader. While this method of storytelling was a bit of a shock to Avengers readers at the time due to the previous cohesiveness of the team barring the Hulk, the devil-may-care attitude of Hawkeye was an immediate hit among both young boys going through their rebellious phases and young girls who were drawn to the bad boy idea. Having said that, while this role of Hawkeye would become the standard throughout the first 50 or so issues of the Avengers, in late 1968, the design of his character began to change following Stan Lee's promotion to the position of editor-in-chief. What I mean here is that where Marvel originally functioned as a subsidiary of magazine management company under the control of publisher and owner Martin Goodman, because Goodman's main focus had been men's magazines with Marvel Comics considered an unexpected success, with comics becoming more and more popular, the various men's magazines published by Goodman began to decrease in popularity, meaning that magazine management began losing more money than it was making. In light of this, magazine management was sold off to Perfect Film and Chemical Corporation owned by Martin S. Ackerman, who in turn kept Goodman on as publisher, but appointed Stan Lee to the position of editor-in-chief due to his experience with Marvel Comics. At the same time, and after having spent several weeks under the tutelage of Mort Weisinger, the legendary editor of DC's Superman line, Roy Thomas was moved to the position of writer for the Avengers and latter half of the X-Men comics. Viewing Hawkeye as an outlier due to the fact that he had no powers amidst a team composed of superpowered beings, as well as a larger Marvel roster which focused on the development of abilities through mutation or experiments, with Avengers issue number 63 in 1969, Thomas looked to bolster the profile of Hawkeye by moving him away from being a normal man and taking on a power set of his own. Coming out of the story and in this corner Goliath, where Hank Pym was the first to use this title after developing the ability to grow to giant sizes, because this time period had seen Black Widow evolved from a villain to an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. working under Nick Fury, during a mission in New York, Black Widow was taken prisoner. Seeking assistance from the Avengers in freeing Romanoff and bringing her kidnappers to justice, while the main Avengers team had traveled to New York, Clint had stolen the Goliath serum from Hank Pym's laboratories, allowing him to grow in size and increase his strength and durability proportionately. Now, where the story would see Clint successfully rescuing Black Widow, Roy Thomas used the story to segue into the next 46 issues, where Hawkeye remained Goliath, albeit without his bow and arrow, and fought against villains like Ultron, took part in the Kree-Skrull War, which introduced Captain Marvel of the Kree and teamed up with the Inhumans. However, because the Goliath concept was more of a way to raise Clint's profile as opposed to being a permanent change, in Avengers issue number 109, Roy Thomas returned Hawkeye to his normal role with a new uniform, after which Marvel began the process of experimenting with the possibility of a solo series. Riding Hawkeye off the Avengers in a fit of jealousy following Scarlet Witch and Vision engaging in a relationship, the crossovers of Hawkeye into Marvel's other titles included a veritable who's who of their lineup, including Daredevil, Hulk, Doctor Strange's Defenders, Ghost Rider, and the Two-Gun Kid. Because these crossovers expose Hawkeye to the larger Marvel audience who may have had no interest in the Avengers and consequently knew very little about Clint, the goal of Marvel was achieved, and that even if it was only out of sheer curiosity or recognition with DC's Green Arrow, Hawkeye had grown enough in popularity that Marvel made the decision to launch his own solo series in 1983. Written by Mark Gruenwald following his success alongside Steve Grant and Bill Mantlo with a limited series Marvel Superhero Contest of Champions, the solo series of Hawkeye allowed Marvel to flesh out his backstory, but also set the stage for a romance with his future wife Bobby Morse, also known as Mockingbird. Taking up employment as a head of security for Cross Technological Enterprises under the control of Augustine Cross, the son of Darren Cross, issue number 1 established that the parents of Hawkeye had died in a car crash when he and his brother were young. After being sent to an orphanage until they were 13 years old, Hawkeye and Clint ran away, after which they took up residence with a traveling carnival where they met one of the star attractions named Swordsman. Taking Clint on as an assistant due to Barney being too old, Swordsman's skills at archery and accuracy were passed on to Clint, with Swordsman becoming something of a father figure. However, this view held by Hawkeye was completely shattered when it was revealed that Swordsman was actually a criminal who had been using his skills to rob local businesses and banks in the towns where the carnival was functioning. Where Clint was offered a position as partner so long as he kept his silence, instead, Hawkeye ran with the intention to inform the authorities. Engaging in a battle with Swordsman who looked to keep this from happening, while Hawkeye was defeated and nearly killed after falling from the top of a trapeze, Barney had saved his life by getting him to a hospital, which led to Clint's first appearance in Marvel Comics. Having said that, something I'd like to draw your attention to is Mockingbird herself. Created as an unnamed character in 1971 by Len Wein and Neil Adams, but expanded on by Mike Friedrich in Astonishing Tales issue number 16 in 1972, Bobby Morse originally served as a companion to Kazar, the King of the Savage Land, but she also served as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. operating under the moniker Agent 19. While Mockingbird's history included an on-again, off-again relationship with Kazar, as well as functioning along the lines of a tour guide during his time in the United States, much like Hawkeye, Marvel had tried to revamp Bobby Morse in a series of ways, which included appearances in Marvel Team-Up alongside Spider-Man, as well as reworking her image into a character called the Huntress. While all of these endeavors largely failed in that interest simply wasn't there, the Hawkeye solo series was akin to the Luke Cage-Iron Fist dichotomy, in that with Mockingbird failing to find success and Hawkeye being viewed as an unessential part of the Avengers, the pairing of these two heroes came together under Mark Gruenwald and created a kind of odd couple scenario. With the solo series seeing the introduction of William Cross as the cousin of Darren and secretly developing plans within Cross Technological Enterprises to destroy the superhero community, the events unfolded with Mockingbird assigned to investigate the company due to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s knowledge on William's activities. Initially coming into conflict with Hawkeye, who had not been aware of what was happening behind the scenes, the story also saw William coming to the conclusion that because Hawkeye was prominent enough of a superhero in the Marvel community, his death would trigger a massive funeral of virtually all the superheroes, making it possible for William to destroy them all at one time. While his plan ultimately failed in that William Cross was defeated, in the final battle, Hawkeye had fired a sonic arrow that temporarily removed Crossfire from the equation and cost Clint his hearing in the process, but also saw Gruenwald bringing Mockingbird and Hawkeye together as a couple who had actually gotten married. Now to move away from Clint for a second, in 1984 under the writing of Roger Stern, Marvel had looked at the idea of creating an Avengers branch-off team for the purpose of increasing sales, but also provided a version of the Avengers composed of less popular characters. The reason for this was actually based heavily on Chris Claremont's run during the X-Men and the 1982 launch of the New Mutants. Centering on the idea of Xavier training a new generation of mutants which were updated for the modern reader, the team proved itself to be wildly popular among young fans who were looking for their own heroes to identify with regarding the X-Men universe. Capitalizing on this popularity and intending to use West Coast Avengers as a kind of litmus test to determine which characters were growing in popularity and which ones weren't, the West Coast Avengers were founded by Hawkeye under the suggestion of Vision. Initially launching as a 4-part series instead of investing time and money in a full run, in addition to Hawkeye and Mockingbird, the introduction of West Coast Avengers came with James Rhodes, Wonder Man Simon Williams, and Tigra. Now again, because this was a testbed, The original 4-issue story focused on the team's efforts to defeat the villain Graviton, a man named Franklin Hall with the ability to control gravity itself. On the other hand, because the miniseries proved to be so successful owing to the idea that Marvel had never created a branch-off team of the Avengers, in 1985, Volume 2 was launched as an ongoing series under the writing of Steve Englehart. Continuing the lineup of the 4-part miniseries but including Tony Stark instead of James Rhodes, West Coast Avengers maintained its headquarters in Los Angeles, focusing on smaller-scale conflicts, while the main Avengers team focused on planetary events. To this end, in addition to seeing Vision and Scarlet Witch forming a more passionate and in-depth relationship which spun out into their own team-up series, Hawkeye and Mockingbird experienced the trials and tribulations that came with their own marriage, and the 5-part story at a time saw a character named Phantom Rider kidnapping Mockingbird, drugging her, and forcing her into a sexual relationship. While she was able to return to her normal self and rebuke Phantom Rider, the situation of unconsensual sex served as a major issue between both Bobby Morse and Clint Barton, and that it allowed the two to bond further in Hawkeye's attempts to help his wife cope with her experience, but also allowed Bobby to reach out to her husband for the emotional assistance that she needed. Now, where West Coast Avengers was taken over by John Byrne with issue number 42 and retitled to Avengers West Coast, on the whole, the dynamic of the team largely remained the same, and following Hank Pym resigning from the Avengers after assaulting his wife Janet, he was brought on board the team in an advisory capacity. In addition to this, while the official roster did change, Hawkeye and Mockingbird remained core members of the team, going on to battle villains like Ultron, Grim Reaper, Master Pandemonium, and Graviton. However, by 1993, because the X-Men titles had reached a fever pitch and were easily standing as Marvel's bread and butter in terms of both storytelling and sales, the various other team titles under Marvel began to suffer, including Alpha Flight, Fantastic Four, Avengers, and Avengers West Coast. Looking to consolidate the Avengers lineup into a single title, issue number 100 saw the team set upon the path of disbanding after Mockingbird was kidnapped by Mephisto and Satanus the Supreme. Taking place in the story Soul Gauntlet, where the West Coast Avengers led a campaign to retrieve Bobby from her captivity, in the battle between the demon forces of Mephisto and the West Coast Avengers, Mockingbird was killed. Using this to write her out of the story and set the stage for a reboot, the Avengers West Coast title was cancelled out and the team was rolled over into the main Avengers title with heroes from both sides coming together. Finding themselves being split into 2 factions by Captain America, in truth, the elimination of Avengers West Coast was name only, but the move did allow Marvel to bring in the process of offering a limited reboot to their non-X-Men titles. Taking place as part of the overarching Onslaught Saga within the pages of Cable, Excalibur, X-Men, X-Man, Uncanny X-Men, and X-Men Unlimited, in the days following the Fatal Attraction storyline which saw Magneto stripping Wolverine of his adamantium, Xavier had absorbed the consciousness of Magneto, allowing both his hatred and Xavier's frustration with humanity to mingle and form the psychic entity Onslaught. Laying waste to the superhero teams of the world with the intention of eliminating all life and taking over the planet, at the conclusion of the event, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and several other Marvel top-tier characters had sacrificed their lives in the hopes of destroying Onslaught. While this did prove itself to be successful, the story also allowed Marvel to segue into Heroes Reborn by having Franklin Richards create a pocket dimension where he resurrected the dead heroes. Now, while the Heroes Reborn was an actual line of comics designed to reboot the most popular non-mutant heroes and teams in an effort to revitalize interest, Hawkeye himself fell within the confines of Hero Reborn Avengers. Written by Rob Liefeld and drawn by Jim Valentino, unlike the main Marvel Universe which saw the Avengers forming due to Loki sending Hulk on a destructive tear, in the Heroes Reborn universe, the Avengers were formed by S.H.I.E.L.D. in response to the Fantastic Four's development of their powers. Using Avengers Island as their base of operations, which was also retrofitted using technology from Tony Stark, the team's initial roster was composed of Swordsman, Hawkeye, Hellcat, and Vision, with Hank Pym, Ultron, and Janet Van Dyne serving in a support capacity. While the Avengers of the Heroes Reborn universe would go on to battle Loki, King the Conqueror, and Mantis in addition to being part of the Atlantean War, regarding Hawkeye, this reality's version of his character was markedly different in that he was not married to Mockingbird, he had never gone deaf, but maintained his signature bow and arrow while lacking none of his accuracy. On the other hand, because the Heroes Reborn line of stories was considered mediocre by virtually all fans and media outlets, Heroes Reborn Avengers lasted only 13 issues before the entire line of Heroes Reborn was wiped and the characters were returned to the normal Marvel landscape. Taking place in the 4-part story Heroes Return, the reconciliation of Hawkeye came in that when Franklin Richards had restored the heroes who had died during the Onslaught Saga, Marvel eliminated the disliked plot elements of his character but maintained what worked, and that Hawkeye's costume was updated, Mockingbird remained dead, and his hearing was restored. However, instead of throwing him back into the Avengers proper, instead, Hawkeye was provided his own solo series with the launch of Volume 2. Written by Chuck Dixon and drawn by Scott Collins, unlike Volume 1, which was largely lighthearted and focused on the development of Clint's relationship with Bobby Morse, leading to their marriage, Volume 2 focused heavily on Clint's reaction to her death and took a much darker tone. Becoming a kind of freelance trainer and operative for various governmental agencies around the world, Hawkeye's assignments range from reconnaissance to bounty hunting to hired protection. Maintaining the same 4-part format as Volume 1, on the whole, Volume 2 proved to be successful among the reader base, who had grown to view Clint as an unessential part of the Avengers, with a few character developments which seemed to be designed more for the sake of keeping him around, as opposed to providing some meat and potatoes to his continuity. Using this as a jumping-off platform, in 1998 under Kurt Busiek, Marvel introduced Clint as part of the Thunderbolts, a team not unlike DC's Suicide Squad, and that the Thunderbolts functioned as villains looking for redemption by working as heroes. Originally consisting of Moonstone, Songbird, Mark I, Atlas, and Jolt, Clint's time on the team was as much a leader as a teacher. Using the lessons learned under Captain America during his time with the Avengers, the Thunderbolts experienced a reformation in that the group was modified to become a legitimate team, operating with cohesiveness and effectiveness, taking on villains like the Masters of Evil and Graviton. Now, with the first volume of Thunderbolts lasting 81 issues going into 2003, at the time, Marvel had come under the control of editor-in-chief Joe Quesada, who looked to reinvigorate interest in the comic line after coming to the conclusion that the greatness of Marvel Comics had been lost over the years, with the current industry being a shadow of its former self. To sidetrack for a second, in my previous videos regarding the history of Marvel Comics and the Avengers themselves, we had talked about how writer Joe Quesada initially got his start in the comic book industry by working as an artist at Valiant Comics during the early 1990s. Working on titles like Ninjak, Solar Man of the Atom, and others, the works of Quesada drew the attention of artist Jimmy Palmiotti, with the two working together to establish their own company called Event Comics. During this time, and because Marvel had been in financial dire straits following the burst of the 90s comic bubble, Quesada and Palmiotti were contacted for the purpose of producing a series of stories under the banner of Marvel Knights, which would serve the purpose of allowing Marvel to continue producing stories, but at a fraction of the cost, by having their characters outsourced. Using his experience to help revitalize Marvel by reaching out to independent comic book creators, including David W. Mack, Brian Michael Bendis, Steve Dillon, and Kevin Smith, within 2 years of launching the Marvel Knight line, Quesada was elevated to the position of editor-in-chief. Because the function of an editor-in-chief maintains all final responsibility regarding a company's operations and policies, the position granted Quesada the ability to examine the entire lineup of Marvel Comics and determine what steps the company should take in moving forward and developing profit. To this end, Quesada had come to the conclusion that the failure of Marvel at the time was that it contained far too many mutants and non-mutant heroes, leading to stories filled to the brim with characters but lacking any true character development. Instead, the various events produced by Marvel were tantamount to a series of crossovers and battles using existing heroes, leading to Marvel's lineup growing stale. Looking to correct this problem, between 2000 and 2010, Quesada orchestrated a series of sweeping changes which included a reduction to the mutant and non-mutant population following the House of M and during Civil War, as well as the elimination and reboot of the Avengers, all while attempting to create new characters for a new generation of readers. Now, regarding Hawkeye, because he had been considered an unessential part of the Avengers but seemed to have remained within the publications as a grandfather character, as part of the Avengers Disassembled event by Brian Michael Bendis, his character was killed off entirely. Coming out of a series of stories dealing with Scarlet Witch's increasing levels of insanity, Avengers Disassembled served to clean slate the entire roster using the Scarlet Witch as a catalyst. Attacking each member of the team individually by manipulating the mind of Tony Stark, forcing him to appear drunk in front of the United Nations, as well as killing Scott Lang and destroying Avengers Mansion. When the main roster and reserves were called in to investigate, Wanda had manifested a Kree Armada in New York, leading to a massive battle between everyone who had ever been an Avenger and the forces conjured through Scarlet Witch's reality-warping powers. During this fight, and as one of the character's most well-known moments, Hawkeye's quiver of arrows was set afire, and because their explosion would have destroyed the battlefield and killed everyone in the group, he sacrificed his life by traveling to the Kree warship where the explosion commenced and destroyed the ship, with Hawkeye dying in the process. Now, because the term of Quesada also focused on the idea of more cohesive storytelling involving Marvel's full roster, when the House of M was launched, which saw the Scarlet Witch taking control of Xavier's mind and warping all of reality into a perfect universe, Hawkeye was reborn and alongside the rest of the Earth's population, quite literally lived the life of his dreams. However, because Wolverine had awoken in the timeline with his memories intact and aware of the changes Scarlet Witch had made, he alongside Luke Cage, Layla Miller, and others began a crusade to wake up other heroes to the truth of their reality and set things back to normal. During this time, and because his uncanny accuracy was needed, Clint Barton was contacted and made aware of the fact that he had been killed by Scarlet Witch prior to her altering of reality. Flying into a fit of rage and attacking Wanda in her home, the actions of Clint coincided with the official start of the story's climax, and that Peter Parker, Doctor Strange, Emma Frost, Wolverine, and others had all launched an attack against Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Polaris, and their father Magneto. While the conclusion of the event revealed that Pietro had convinced his sister to warp reality, sending Magneto into a fit of rage and killing his son, at the story's end, Scarlet Witch set everything back to normal, but with the caveat that 98% of the mutant population lost their powers. Using the story's end as a way to revitalize the Avengers by reforming the team with a new roster of younger and more popular heroes, in the final pages of House of M, it was revealed that Hawkeye had been resurrected by Scarlet Witch following reality's return to normalcy. Now, where a majority of Hawkeye's time was spent underground during the events of Civil War, in the days following the story's conclusion and the arrest of Captain America, under writer Brian Michael Bendis, Hawkeye was rolled over into New Avengers with a few sporadic appearances involving him approaching Doctor Strange for refuge while he came to terms with his resurrection, as well as becoming intimate with Scarlet Witch in his efforts to understand why she attacked Avengers Mansion and caused his death. However, while the roster of New Avengers was largely well received by critics and fans, on the whole, Hawkeye was just as much a mascot for the team as a contributing member. Looking to a return to some measure of regularity if for no other reason than nostalgia, fan demand led to Bendis reintroducing Hawkeye to the larger Marvel roster by having him offer the mantle of Captain America by Tony Stark following Roger's death. Now, where this offer was turned down and eventually accepted by Bucky Barnes, after officially joining the New Avengers team, Bendis remolded Barton into the hero Ronin. While this would remain the character's identity over the course of the next several years until the official start of Heroic Age, Bendis also set about introducing a kind of heir or protege to the Hawkeye mantle by way of a girl named Kate Bishop. Created by Alan Heinberg and Jim Cheung as part of Marvel's Young Avengers, which focused on teenage heroes, Kate Bishop was initially presented as a survivor of a brutal assault, which set her on a campaign to avenge her attack, but also engage in combat training. While her time among the Young Avengers saw her contributing as one of the team's most valuable assets due to her ability to maintain a level head under pressure, in 2008, writer Matt Fraction provided the passing of the torch with Young Avengers Presents Hawkeye. Centering on the internal life of Kate Bishop by focusing on her relationships and existential crisis regarding her place in the world of heroes, in terms of Clint Barton himself, under the guise of Ronin, he had attacked Kate and tested her various abilities, pushing her to her mental and moral limits. Because the story was designed to present a new Hawkeye for the modern reader, after an archery contest which saw Kate defeated, both she and her boyfriend Eli had snuck into the Secret Avengers headquarters and stolen Hawkeye's original bow, a feat which was noticed but saw Clint bestowing his blessing on Kate, allowing her to carry both the bow and the name Hawkeye. Having said that, because Quesada's overarching plan was to return Marvel to what he perceived to be the height of its publication history in the 1960s and 1970s, the logic behind House of M, Civil War, Siege, Dark Reign, and the various other stories of the 2000s was to eliminate what didn't work, keep what did, and rework the entire line of Marvel titles into more lighthearted stories. Coming into fruition with the start of the Heroic Age in 2010, writer Brian Michael Bendis had rolled the New Avengers' most popular heroes over into the reformed Avengers team, which included Clint. Returning to his mantle of Hawkeye but allowing Kate Bishop to maintain the identity as well, where Heroic Age could best be summed up as a soft reboot, it was a reboot nonetheless. As such, Hawkeye's character saw a return to his roots with a team-up alongside Mockingbird. Coming in the 6-part miniseries Hawkeye and Mockingbird written by Jim McCann and drawn by David Lopez, much like the original 4-part series from Mark Gruenwald, the team-up of Clint and Bobby Morse was a return to familiarity, with the two battling the revived William Cross and working alongside Black Widow. Proving itself to be wildly popular among readers and that it fulfilled the Heroic Age's promise by returning the hero to what made him great, in 2011, McCann returned again with a 4-part miniseries Hawkeye Blind Spot. Receiving universal acclaim by focusing on the idea of Hawkeye slowly losing his eyesight and coping with the potential loss of his most important asset, the story also saw his backstory revamped in that his parents' death by car crash remained, but his father was shown to have been a violent alcoholic. While the story would see Tony Stark providing Hawkeye with a means to keep his eyesight for as long as possible, Blind Spot also saw the return of Clint's brother Barney, who had been trained in combat and eventually exceeded Clint in skill. Learning that his brother was working for Baron Helmut Zemo, who intended to have the two face off in a battle to the death, after the fight, Hawkeye had proved to be victorious, with Barney providing a bone marrow transplant, saving Hawkeye's eyesight, but becoming his most sworn enemy in the process. Finding the miniseries to be so popular due to both its writing as well as Hawkeye's profile being raised in anticipation for the release of Avengers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in 2012, under writer Matt Fraction, Marvel launched Hawkeye Volume 4 as an ongoing series. Lasting for 22 issues, in truth, Fraction's run on the character is considered to be a hallmark of Hawkeye, and the Fraction had drawn on the various writings of previous solo series, as well as Hawkeye's own role within the Avengers and the various team-up stories. Moving away from trying to elevate Clint to being an equal to superpowered heroes and instead allowing Hawkeye to just be Hawkeye, Fraction's run received universal acclaim from virtually all media outlets, and that the run provided an inner monologue and snappy conversation with Kate Bishop, as Clint took on the role of a more involved mentor, but also focused on who Clint was on a personal level and how he perceived his place in the Marvel Pantheon as an everyman hero. This narrative, combined with art from David Aja, Javier Pulido, and Annie Wu, as well as the introduction of Lucky the Pizza Dog, came together to form what many consider to be Hawkeye's definitive story. That said, with Marvel fleshing out the idea of Secret Wars in all series from 2012 moving forward, leading up to the event's launch, at the conclusion of Fraction's run in 2015, Clint fell in line with most of Marvel's roster as a casualty of the multiverse's collapse and the final incursion between the Earth-616 and the Ultimate Universe. So with the official start of All New, All Different Marvel, while we're only 6 issues into the story, there is some information we could draw on to provide a little information on what's happening at the moment. With the series coming under the control of writer Jeff Lemire, unlike previous installments, All New, All Different Hawkeye doesn't actually focus on Clint per se, and instead also includes Kate Bishop as a partner. Centering on a group of 3 children referred to as Project Communion who develop powerful psionic abilities following their exposure to the Terrigen Mist, the comic bounces back and forth between the present and the future, with present-day Clint and Kate experiencing a rift in their friendship when Hawkeye hands the children over to Hydra, and the future seeing this rift and decision play out to its fruition, with the two being estranged and Project Communion laying waste to China after being taken and deployed by S.H.I.E.L.D. Now again, because the middle ground between the present and the future events have yet to be completed, there is a bit of a story remaining as to how Project Communion ended up in the hands of S.H.I.E.L.D. But in addition to these events, the series also focused on the history of Kate Bishop in the Marvel Prime reality and the events that led up to her introduction in the comics and her partnership with Hawkeye. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. This was a beast, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.